The elevator doors closed. Two men in the back hadn't moved since Catherine Hale stepped in, and they weren't going to. One of them reached past her and pressed the emergency stop. No alarms, just silence and the low hum of a building that didn't care. Nobody in that elevator said a word. Not the woman in the corner, not the man by the door. Everyone made themselves smaller, except for one person, a maintenance worker still holding his daughter's lunchbox, who took one step forward and said 6 words. Quiet, flat, certain. The two men backed down. To understand what happened in that elevator, you have to understand what kind of man Daniel Mercer was before he ever stepped into it. He wasn't the kind of man who made noise. He worked the overnight maintenance shift at Baxter Tower, one of those tall glass buildings in downtown Chicago, where every floor felt like a different country. The higher you went, the quieter the carpet got, the colder the air. Daniel worked in the basement. He knew where the fuse boxes were, which pipes ran hot in winter, which freight elevator had a delay on the 3rd floor. He knew the building the way a man knows something he has spent years learning in silence. He was 38, a former Army corporal and a single father. His daughter Lily was 7 years old and obsessed with dinosaurs. Those were the 3 most important facts about Daniel Mercer, and they weren't separate facts. They were the same fact arranged in different order, depending on what the day asked of him. Every morning, Daniel's shift ended at 6:45. He had exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes to get home, change, get Lily ready, and drop her at school before her 8 o'clock bell. He had never missed it, not once in 2 years. That was the rule he had built his entire life around. Not a goal, not an intention, but a hard edge he refused to let the world push him past. That particular Tuesday morning in late October, he was moving fast. He'd grabbed his bag from his locker, clocked out, and was halfway to the lobby elevator when he noticed the weight in his left hand was wrong. He looked down. Blue plastic small handle, a green stegosaurus printed on the lid. Lily's lunchbox, not his. He must have grabbed it off the kitchen counter in the dark that morning without looking. He flipped it open out of habit. Inside, on top of the sandwich he'd made for her the night before, was a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it. The handwriting was crooked and large, the way a 7-year-old writes when she's trying very hard. It said, "Dad, I'll wait for you today, okay?" He folded it back, tucked it into his jacket pocket, kept walking. Catherine Hale arrived at Baxter Tower at 7:11, the same way she arrived every morning. Coat buttoned, phone in hand, eyes forward. She was 54 and ran Hale Capital from the 31st floor. The company managed close to $2 billion in assets. She made decisions that moved money across 3 time zones before most people had finished their coffee. The people who worked for her described her as precise. The people who competed against her used other words. She had a daughter named Stephanie, who was 29 and lived in Portland. They hadn't spoken in any real way for 3 years. Stephanie had stopped calling after a birthday dinner that Catherine had missed, not the first one, but apparently the last one Stephanie was willing to forgive. Catherine had sent flowers the next morning and a card with a handwritten apology. Stephanie had texted back 2 words, "It's fine." Then she'd gone quiet in the way that meant it wasn't. Catherine had told herself more than once that she would deal with it. She hadn't. The elevator bank in Baxter Tower's main lobby had 4 cars. At 7:12 that morning, Catherine pressed the button for car 3, and a man she had never seen stepped in just behind her, tall in a maintenance uniform, holding a child's lunchbox. She didn't look at him. She looked at her phone. 2 men were already inside the elevator. They were dressed in dark suits, unremarkable at a glance, the kind of men a building like this produced in multiples every morning. But Daniel, the moment he stepped in and the doors closed behind them, felt something wrong. It wasn't anything they said. It was the way they were standing. Most people in an elevator drift. They pull toward corners, look at their phones, create distance out of reflex. These two weren't drifting. They had taken positions, one near the panel, one behind Catherine. Their weight was forward. Their eyes hadn't moved to their phones once. Daniel had spent 4 years in the army reading rooms the way other people read faces. He knew when a space had been arranged. The elevator climbed. No one spoke. At the 4th floor, instead of stopping, the car kept moving, and then the man by the panel pressed the red emergency button. The elevator stopped between floors with a soft mechanical shudder. No alarm sounded. The taller of the two men turned to Catherine. His voice was low, and even the kind of voice that had rehearsed itself. He told her that Vincent Crane wanted a meeting, that the deal she had walked away from $200 million, 18 months of work, wasn't finished, that Mr. Crane was a patient man, but patience had a shape. And this was it. Catherine didn't move. Her face was controlled, but her hands had gone still, in a way that wasn't calm. Daniel recognized that stillness. He had seen it before in people who were afraid, and had decided not to show it. The second man stepped to her left, closing the angle. Daniel stood at the back of the elevator, Lily's lunchbox in his hand, and understood exactly what was happening. These weren't men who had wandered into a confrontation. This had been planned. They knew. Her schedule, knew the building, knew which elevator she took. He didn't know what Vincent Crane was capable of beyond this room, but inside it, the math was simple. 2 of them. 1 exit, and a woman with no one between her and whatever came next. He checked the time on his phone. 7:18. Lily's school opened the doors at 7:55. He had 37 minutes. He looked at Catherine's face again. Not the CEO face, not the controlled, professional expression she was holding on to, but the thing underneath it, the part that didn't have a strategy. He took 1 step forward. The space inside the elevator was not large to begin with. With 5 people in it, and nobody moving, it felt like the walls had shifted inward by a foot on each side. Daniel stood between Catherine and the 2 men, close enough that he could hear the taller one breathing. Nobody else in the car. A woman in her 40s pressed flat against the left wall. A younger man staring at the floor made a sound. They had already decided this wasn't their problem. Daniel hadn't decided that yet. But he understood the situation clearly enough to know what it cost him to stay in it. He had no weapon. He didn't know if either of these men did. He couldn't see their hands from this angle, and in a space this small that mattered. The taller man outweighed him by 30 pounds, easy. The second one was compact, and still in the specific way that trained people get. Still not nervous stillness, but the kind that comes from having been in rooms like this before and knowing how they end. His phone was in his jacket pocket. 7:18. 37 minutes. The taller man looked at Daniel the way people look at something unexpected, not threatened, not yet, just recalibrating. "You need to mind your business," he said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't move back either. The second man took a half step to the right, adjusting position the way you adjust when an obstacle appears in a plan that didn't account for one. Catherine was still behind Daniel. He could feel her there, not touching him, but close the way a person gets close to the only solid thing in a room that's tilting. The taller man's jaw tightened. He started to speak again, lower this time, the kind of register that was meant to land like a hand on a shoulder. Daniel looked straight at him. Not aggressive, not performative. Just direct the way a man looks at something he has already made a decision about. And he said it quietly, the way you say something you don't need to shout, because you already know it's true. "My daughter is waiting for me." 6 words. No threat inside them. No bluff. The elevator went completely silent. Not the silence of tension before something breaks a different kind. The kind that comes when something has already been decided, and everyone in the room is only now catching up to it. The taller man held Daniel's gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he looked at the lunchbox, the small blue plastic container with the green stegosaurus on the lid, sitting in Daniel's left hand, like it had always been there, and something in his expression shifted. Not softness, something closer to a miscalculation being recognized. The second man glanced at his partner. The taller one gave the smallest shake of his head. He reached past Daniel and pressed the button for the next floor. The elevator resumed its climb. When the doors opened at floor 6, both men walked out without looking back. Their footsteps were unhurried. They turned left down the corridor and were gone. The woman pressed against the wall exhaled. The younger man finally looked up. Nobody said anything. Catherine stood exactly where she had been standing, and for a long moment, she didn't move at all. Daniel checked the time again. 7:22. He had 33 minutes. He pressed the lobby button and rode the rest of the way down in silence. He made it to school by 7:53. Lily ran out the front door of their apartment building with one shoe only half on her backpack swinging, and he crouched down at the bottom of the steps to tie it, while she talked at him about something that had happened in a book she was reading. He listened. He drove her to school, walked her to the gate, and watched her disappear into the crowd of small jackets and backpacks without looking back, because she never looked back. She trusted he'd be there when she turned around later. He sat in the parking lot for a moment before pulling out. He thought about the elevator, not the men the moment just before he stepped forward when the choice was still open in both directions. He hadn't been brave. He'd just been unable to do the other thing. By noon, word had moved the way word moves in large buildings. Someone on the facilities team mentioned that maintenance had been asked about one of their overnight crew, not by management, by someone external asking through channels that weren't official. The crew chief told Daniel about it in the break room, casual, almost a footnote. "Some guy asking questions," he said. "Don't know what it's about." Daniel knew what it was about. He didn't have a lawyer. He didn't have connections that ran in the same direction as Vincent Crane's. He had a union car to lease and a daughter who was waiting for him at 3 o'clock. Whatever Crane's people were looking for, they would find it quickly. There wasn't much to obscure. Upstairs on the 31st floor, Catherine Hale sat at her desk and did not do the thing she was supposed to be doing. Her assistant had brought her the afternoon briefing twice. Both times it sat unopened. She was looking at the wall. She kept returning to it. Not the threat, not the elevator itself, but the specific detail of a man standing between her and two professionals with a child's lunchbox in his hand. She had managed people for 30 years. She understood leverage risk calculation, the geometry of power in a negotiation. What she could not fit into any of those frameworks was the look on Daniel's face when he'd said those 6 words. There was nothing calculated about it. He wasn't performing courage. He was just telling the truth about where he needed to be. And somehow, that truth had weight that the two men's combined 250 pounds hadn't managed to carry. She thought about the last time someone had waited for her. Stephanie's 21st birthday. There had been a dinner planned at a small restaurant on the north side that Stephanie had picked herself. Catherine had been in the middle of closing a deal that restructured a debt position across 4 entities, and the call had run long, and she had arrived at the restaurant at 9:47 to find the table empty and a text from Stephanie that said, "Only, I figured you weren't coming." "It's okay, Mom." Catherine had called 3 times on the way home. Stephanie had picked up on the 3rd call and said the words again. "It's okay." She'd said it the way people say things that are the opposite of okay, and Catherine had filed it away under things to address later, and addressed it never. The flowers the next morning, the handwritten card, 2 words back. "It's fine." Then 8 years of fine, which wasn't fine at all. Catherine pulled up Stephanie's contact on her phone. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put the phone face down on her desk and stood up. The maintenance break room was on the subground level past the freight corridor and the utility lockers. Catherine had owned this building for 3 years and had never been below the lobby. The fluorescent lighting down here was a different quality than what the upper floors used, harder, more honest. There was a folding table, a coffee machine that looked older than the building, and a row of metal lockers along the back wall. Daniel was at the table, jacket on, bag over one shoulder, about to leave. He looked up when she walked in. He didn't stand. He didn't look surprised, exactly, more like a man who had half expected something and was giving it space to arrive. Catherine had planned a sentence on the way down. A formal acknowledgement, professional, appropriate. It dissolved the moment she was actually standing in the room. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "For this morning." Daniel nodded once. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't." She looked around the room for a moment, as if seeing it clearly for the first time. "I've been in this building for 3 years. I didn't know this room existed." "Most people on your floor don't," Daniel said. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact, delivered the same way he delivered those 6 words, flat and without decoration. She found herself asking the question before she decided to ask it. "Were you scared?" Daniel set his bag down on the table. He thought about it, actually. Thought not the reflex of reassurance. "Yeah," he said. "I didn't know if they were carrying. I didn't know how far they were willing to go." He picked up the lunchbox from the table beside his bag. But Lily was waiting. And if I'd stayed in the corner, I don't know how I would have looked her in the eye after. Catherine was quiet. Something about the simplicity of it. Not heroism, not ideology. Just a father who couldn't face his daughter, having made a different choice, landed somewhere in her chest that she hadn't expected. She didn't plan what came out next. She heard herself talking about a restaurant on the north side, about a birthday 8 years ago, about a text that said, "I figured you weren't coming," about Portland, and 3 years of phone calls that went one way, and a daughter who had stopped waiting without ever saying she had stopped. Daniel listened. He didn't fill in the gaps or offer explanations for what Stephanie might have felt. He just let it sit there until she was done. "She moved to Portland 3 years ago," Catherine said. "We haven't really talked since." "I know what it's like," Daniel said, "to let time do the thing you're too afraid to do yourself." He picked up his bag and stood. "But that means you already know what comes next." He looked at her directly, the same way he'd looked at the tall man in the elevator. "That's the thing you have to do next." He said it without drama. Then he walked to the door and left. Catherine stood alone in the break room under the fluorescent lights, and for the first time in a very long time, she had no meeting to go back to that felt more important than what was standing in front of her. The days after the elevator were quiet in the way that things are quiet before they shift. Daniel went back to his shift the following night. He mopped the same corridors, checked the same boiler readings, replaced a flickering light in the second-floor conference room at 2 in the morning, while the rest of the building slept. Everything looked the same. But the crew chief found him again on Wednesday. Same break room, same casual tone that wasn't actually casual. Someone had called the building's HR office this time, asking about overnight staff. No name given, no formal complaint, just questions the kind that didn't need to be formal to do damage. Daniel listened. He thanked the crew chief. He went back to work and finished his shift. But somewhere between the boiler room and the freight elevator, a thought he had been keeping at arm's length moved closer. It wasn't fear of losing the job that bothered him most. It was the job itself, what it looked like laid flat in front of him, without the distraction of routine. 6 nights a week, home by 7, out again by 10 p.m. The hours when Lily needed help with reading, when she had nightmares, when she wanted someone to sit on the edge of her bed and just be there. Those were the hours he was in a basement checking pressure gauges. He had built the schedule around keeping her fed and housed and delivered to school on time. He had not asked himself until now whether showing up at the right address was the same thing as being present. He sat in his car after the Thursday shift and looked at the note still folded in his jacket pocket. "Dad, I'll wait for you today, okay?" She wrote notes like that because she knew, without knowing, she knew that he was always almost there. Almost. The almost had been acceptable for 2 years because the alternative had felt like instability, and instability was the thing he had sworn to protect her from after her mother left. But a man sitting in a parking garage at 7 in the morning, reading a 7-year-old's handwriting by the light of his phone, has to eventually ask himself what exactly he is protecting her from, and whether the thing he's protecting her from has quietly become him. Catherine booked the flight to Portland on a Thursday evening. She canceled it 40 minutes later. She rebooked it Friday morning, a 6:50 a.m. departure, and this time she left the confirmation in her inbox and did not open it again because she knew if she opened it, she would find a reason to change something. She drafted a message to Stephanie 17 times across 3 days. Not emails, texts, because emails felt like documents, and what she needed to say didn't belong in a document. The drafts ranged from 3 sentences to 2 paragraphs. Some were formal. Some were the opposite of formal, in a way that embarrassed her when she read them back. None of them got sent because every version she wrote was still trying to manage the outcome, still trying to arrange the words so that Stephanie would respond in a particular way. And she recognized finally on the 17th draft that this was exactly the problem. She had spent 30 years arranging words so that people would respond in particular ways. She was very good at it, and it had cost her the one relationship where it should never have been a technique. She deleted the draft. She did not write another one. She took a car to O'Hare at 4:30 a.m. on Saturday and got on the plane. She had not told Stephanie she was coming. The flight was just over 4 hours. Catherine spent most of it looking out the window at the dark over the Midwest, drinking bad coffee and not preparing anything. That was new. In 30 years of difficult conversations, boardrooms, depositions, negotiations, where the wrong sentence could move millions of dollars in the wrong direction, she had always prepared. She had always known walking in what she needed the room to do. She didn't know that this time. She had nothing to deploy. The cab from PDX dropped her in front of a duplex on a quiet street in northeast Portland at 9:15 in the morning. The neighborhood was older, the kind of street where people had put up string lights on their porches and left them there past the season. Stephanie's half of the duplex had a small front garden with something low and green growing in it that Catherine didn't know the name of. There was a bicycle leaning against the porch railing. Catherine stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then she walked up the 3 steps and knocked. The door opened after a long moment. Stephanie was in jeans and a gray sweatshirt, her hair not done, a mug in her hand. She was 29 years old, and she looked at her mother the way a person looks at someone they have spent time imagining they were ready to see, and then suddenly aren't. She did not open the door wider. She did not step back to let Catherine in. Mom. It wasn't a greeting. It was an identification. I should have called, Catherine said. I know. Yeah. Stephanie leaned against the doorframe, mug held in both hands against her chest. You should have. And then, because there was nothing left to arrange and nowhere left to retreat to, Catherine simply started talking. She stood on the porch in the October cold and said the things she had not said in 8 years. She said that she had known, even as she was choosing the meeting over the dinner, that she was making a choice that couldn't be undone the same way it was made. That the flowers the next morning were not an apology, they were a management strategy, and Stephanie had deserved better than a management strategy. She said that she had filed Stephanie under things to address later the same way she filed operational problems, and that this was the most accurate and most damning thing she could say about what had gone wrong. She said she was sorry in a way that wasn't attached to a desired outcome, which was the first time she had said those words without architecture underneath them. Stephanie listened. She didn't cry. She didn't move from the doorframe. Her expression was not hard. It was careful, the way a person is careful with something that has burned them before and might burn them again. When Catherine finished, the street was quiet. Somewhere down the block, a dog was barking at something. Stephanie looked at her coffee mug, then back up. I've thought about this conversation a lot, she said. Different versions of it. What I'd say, what you'd say. She exhaled slowly. I don't really know what to do with this right now. You don't have to do anything with it right now, Catherine said. I know. Stephanie's jaw shifted slightly. I need more time, Mom. That's all I can tell you right now. I need more time. It was not the answer Catherine had wanted. She had wanted the door to open, not just the physical door, but the other one, the one that had been closed for 3 years. She had wanted to earn it back in a single conversation, the way she had earned things back in boardrooms by making the right argument at the right moment. But standing on that porch, she understood with a clarity that was almost physical that this was not a boardroom, and Stephanie was not a counterparty. She was a person who had been hurt by someone who should have known better, and she was allowed to take as long as she needed. Okay, Catherine said. Just that. Stephanie looked at her for a moment longer. Then she said, You came all the way here without calling first. I did. That's not like you. No, Catherine agreed. It isn't. Something in Stephanie's expression moved, not open, not forgiving, but something. The door didn't open, but it didn't close harder either. You should get a hotel, Stephanie said. It's cold out. Catherine nodded. She walked back down the 3 steps to the sidewalk. She did not look back because she had made the trip to say what needed to be said, not to watch for a reaction. Whatever Stephanie did with it now belonged to Stephanie. Back in Chicago, things moved quietly. Catherine made one call to her head of facilities operations on Monday morning. She didn't explain it in detail. She said there was a position opening up daytime facilities, management, overseeing building operations across 2 properties, better hours, better pay, and she had a name for the shortlist. She gave the name. Then she moved on to the rest of her morning. She didn't tell Daniel. She didn't send a message, didn't flag it to him through HR, didn't make it an event. She had used what she had to open a door. What he did with it was his. Daniel heard about the opening from the crew chief the following week. Daytime hours, actual management track, the kind of position that didn't require him to choose between a night shift and a 7-year-old who wrote notes on folded paper. He asked where it had come from. The crew chief shrugged and said someone had recommended him. Daniel didn't push it. He knew roughly what the shape of it was. He thought about it for 2 days. Not the offer itself, that part was straightforward. He thought about whether he was the kind of man who could accept something that came through a door he hadn't opened himself. What he came back to both times was simple. It wasn't charity. It was an accurate assessment of what the situation had cost him and what he was owed by the version of the world that operated fairly. He had stepped forward when no one else did. He had done it for nothing, except a reason that mattered to him. The fact that a door had opened afterward did not make the step smaller. He applied on Thursday. By Friday afternoon, he had an interview scheduled for the following week. The interview went well. Not because he performed well, but because he knew the building better than anyone who had interviewed for the position, and that was simply the truth on the table. He got the call on a Tuesday. He started the following Monday. The first week on day shift felt strange, the way any new structure feels strange before the body adapts to it. He was home by 5:30. He made dinner. He sat at the kitchen table while Lily did homework, and she talked the way she always talked about everything and nothing, and he was there for all of it. Not half present, not watching the clock, not calculating how much sleep he would need before the next shift. Just there. On Friday of that first week, he picked her up from school. He was standing at the gate at 3 o'clock, not rushing, not checking his phone for the time. The bell rang and the doors opened, and Lily came out in the middle of a crowd of small jackets, and she spotted him from 20 feet away and ran. He crouched down to her level the way he always did, and she crashed into him with the full weight of a 7-year-old who has no reason to hold back. He straightened up and took her backpack. It was heavier than usual. He unzipped the front pocket to redistribute the weight and found her lunchbox inside the blue plastic one with the green stegosaurus sitting exactly where it was supposed to be. He zipped the pocket closed and took her hand, and they walked to the car. In Portland, Catherine checked out of her hotel on Tuesday morning. She had stayed 3 days longer than she'd planned. She had walked the neighborhood near Stephanie's street both mornings, not for any reason other than that it felt important to be in the same city for a little while, without requiring anything from it. She didn't contact Stephanie again during those 3 days. She had said what she'd come to say. The rest wasn't hers to manage. She was in the cab to the airport when her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. It was Stephanie. 3 words, "Mom, get home safe." Not forgiveness, not the door swinging open. Just 3 words that meant I received what you gave me, and I'm still here. Catherine read them once. Then she set the phone face up on the seat beside her and looked out the window at the city moving past the low gray sky over Portland. The neighborhoods she didn't know, with their string lights and bicycles, and front gardens, with things growing in them that she didn't have names for. She thought about what Daniel had said in the break room. That's the thing you have to do next. He had said it the same way he said everything, without extra weight, without theater. Just the plain shape of a truth that was already there, waiting for her to stop walking past it. She had done the next thing. It hadn't fixed everything. It hadn't been supposed to. But Stephanie's message was sitting on the seat beside her, and a door that had been closed for 3 years was now, for the first time, simply not fully closed. That was not nothing. In fact, for a woman who had spent 8 years letting the distance grow one unopened door at a time, it was the only thing that mattered. The cab merged onto the highway. The city fell away behind her. She picked up her phone and read the 3 words one more time. Then she started thinking about what she would say when Stephanie was ready to hear more, not the arranged version, not the strategic version, just the true one. She had time to get it right. For the first time in a long time, she was willing to take it.